from the district.
Thank you. Senator Storm.
Present remotely from my district.
Okay, thank you. Senator Thomas.
I too am present remotely in my district.
Thank you. Senator Wise.
They're going to make us test to say something. There's a part of me that says she don't walk out very hard.
Just a second. Sorry.
Except that I'm done. Is there one?
Okay, they muted. Alrighty. Representative Blanton.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Fleming. Representative Hatton.
Present from my district.
Representative Jenkins. Thank you. Representative Riley.
Present at my annex office.
Thank you. Representative Sharp.
Present in the district.
Thank you. Vice Chair Howell.
Present remotely from my district.
Thank you. Vice Chair Beckler. Co-Chair Nemes. And Co-Chair Carroll.
Present in the room.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have a quorum and duly constituted to do business. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the November 10th, 2021 meeting. Motion. We have a motion from Representative Blanton. Do I have a second? Senator Nemes. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Before we get started on the agenda today, I'm going to take a couple minutes, and then I'm going to ask Senator Howell to also give us an update on what's going on in his district in relation to the storm. So, as you all know, our districts adjoin. I have Marshall, which was the main county that was affected during the tornadoes in my district, and also my home. I actually live in Benton. The tornado missed us by about 1.5 miles, maybe, so we were very fortunate. Did do some damage within Benton itself, but the main damage came in the eastern part of the county, neighborhoods there. Some pretty major devastation, more confined, though, perhaps, than what we had in the east end of the county out on Kentucky Lake, Cambridge Shores. And there were houses hit in between and businesses hit in between those two locations. I did have the opportunity Saturday afternoon to go out to Cambridge Shores and try to help out a little bit and talk to some of the people. And, it's people wandering around, not really knowing where to start, and just a bewildered look on their faces. Complete devastation to that area. From drone footage, it appears that the tornado came through the area and either lingered or somehow circled back around. But it's really hard to tell from the damage, and really without having high aerial views to track the path, it's difficult to tell. But some homes just completely and utterly destroyed. But we are building back. There is a small army down in our part of the state now. The logistics is becoming the challenge now. Millions of dollars are pouring in either through the state's relief fund or the account that the governor set up, and then also some of the local counties have set up funds. So we do have money coming in. The state parks are opened as the governor ordered. He and we were able to get volunteers, really more than they can use at this point. So those efforts are going very well. Red Cross, FEMA, organizations from all over this country are there feeding and taking care of our people. And, for my district, and I'll let Jason speak for his district, I cannot thank the people of this state, the people of this country enough for what they have done for our community. Those things keep pouring in, and we know this is going to be something we're going to be dealing with for months, if not years. And so I think plans are kind of shifting that way. Buses full of volunteers coming to help clean up the area. I get calls every day on things that are simple things that are needed now, like dumpsters in the neighborhood, so they don't have to go to the central landfill or central station to take their trash. And so the emergency services personnel in Marshall, I cannot say enough good about what they've done, and the not just the counties in the Commonwealth that came to assist, but the counties in other states that came to assist, and very professionally handled through our fire department at East Marshall. And actually one of their facilities, one of their fire departments, was destroyed during the storm. So they're dealing with all of that and then coordinating all the search and rescue efforts. The last word that I had, we had 2 deaths, one directly related to the storm. The other one, there were some health issues involved, and probably, I think they said like 8 to 11 rescues from that night. And I think the good Lord was watching over our people that night, because when you look at that neighborhood and look at the other homes on the west side of the county, having 2 deaths is to me is just a miracle from what I saw. But I can't think of everyone enough for all the efforts. And I want to say something, and you all know how critical I am of our governor. I'm very proud of our governor today. Seeing the way he has handled this when he came down to Mayfield with FEMA and spoke with our people, and the efforts that he has made, I think the sincerity that he has addressed the situation with, and the pain that he feels, the stress that he feels, the burden that he feels is evident when you see him and when you talk to him. And I have no doubt that it's sincere. And I'm proud of our governor today for the way he has handled this, and the concern and the assistance that he has provided to and for our people. And I just want him to know that, and proud of our governor. Senator Howell, I'm going to let you have the floor. And if you don't mind, just update folks on what's going on in your district, especially there in Mayfield.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I mirror and repeat everything Danny just said. This is organized chaos, quite candidly. In my district, it hit 4 of my 6 counties: Fulton, Hickman, Graves, and Lyon. It had to pass through Danny to get there. But it's just intimidating is the only way I know to put it, what the destruction looks like. Danny mentioned the local people in Graves County. They were downtown in the midst of all of that rubble, sorting things out and putting some order together in the dark Friday night. It's hard to explain. I left the other day. I'm in Mayfield 2 or 3 times a week and have been for 15 years. And I got lost getting out of downtown because there's no landmarks. It's just incomprehensible to see the extent of this damage and the power that it happened with. It turned overloaded rail cars that weigh roughly 146 tons loaded. It's just the strength and magnitude of this thing is just overwhelming. It's heartwarming isn't the word I want to use, but it's so encouraging with the outpouring of support. But it's so frustrating because on one side you have all of this need, and on the other side you have all this manpower and resources, and connecting those two together is incredibly difficult. So it's almost like you make soup with it. You bring everything to the fairgrounds and everybody comes in and gets what they need with kind of centralized processing. It's rough. It's rough for a lot of people. There are a lot of people that are affected in this and associated in many different ways. And the impact is going to last a long time. It's going to take parts of our district a couple of years to work through this. And then we're going to have downstream issues that leave a mark. There's not going to be ways to get people back employed or places to house them. And you need both of those. You can't have one without the other. Some of these businesses won't be back up and running this time next year. We're going to have a lot of downstream problems after all the cameras leave Mayfield, Kentucky. people are still going to be trying to put their lives back together, and it's going to take a long time. It'll take a couple of years at least to get to sort through all of this stuff and regain some sort of normalcy for everybody. So as much as we appreciate everybody's time and attention now, please be with us for the long haul, because this isn't going to be over. When society's attention span leaves this issue and moves on to the next thing, we're still going to be here dealing with this, and we appreciate y'all's support through this long journey that we're looking at.
Thank you, Senator Howe. Are there other members, either present or joining us remotely, that have districts that were affected that would like to give an update? And me personally, we were out, power and phone service was sketchy, so for a few days I didn't get much information at all. So I'm interested to hear. Representative Beckler, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent a district out west, and one of the counties I represent is Caldwell County. Caldwell County was hit extremely hard in certain areas. Caldwell County, I actually have constituents with the Dawson Springs address, and there were 5 deaths out there in Caldwell. The area was decimated. I can't add anything more to what has been said about the help and what the devastation looks like. Also in Caldwell County, there were several subdivisions that were just almost totally destroyed. And the UK Research Center is located in Princeton, Kentucky, and it was essentially leveled. The new building that just went up was just had ribbon cutting and everything about a year ago. It's gone. The fields the crop fields were damaged. I think there's probably still some animals that haven't been accounted for that are kind of running loose. So it was terrible. I've had a number of people, of course, reach out to me. Had somebody as far away as central Minnesota who has heavy equipment and wants to come down and help. So the response we've had, as was mentioned, not just from the Commonwealth, but from all over the country, has just been wonderful. On the way to the Capitol today for this meeting and other meetings that I have, saw an Army convoy going down the road. So they are they're prime, they're helping, and we just need everybody's prayers. And like Senator Howell said, once the immediate news moves on to something else, we'll still need everybody's help. So thanks to everyone, and thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have any other members? Okay. And we need to remind the folks in our district, I'm sure everyone's doing that, we're going to see predators start coming in to those areas now, and at home, we're already seeing a little bit of that. I plan to file a bill this session that will enhance penalties for crimes that are committed during states of emergency, when the crime has to do as related to that emergency. I've had that request from law enforcement in my area because we're already starting to see those issues. And I know the AG's office will be very mindful and will be monitoring price gouging in those areas to make sure that's not happening. So I appreciate all those efforts. And one thing that I think it'd be good for everyone to know, that the funding that is coming into the state, and last I heard, I think to that account was like $10 million, and I'm sure it's greater than that now. But the governor was going to make sure that portions of that money would be used to cover funeral expenses for those who lost their lives. And I thought that was very appropriate, and I know that there are families that will very much appreciate that. And we've also had some discussions within a few of us that, this is something that is becoming all too common in our state, whether it be flooding, tornadoes, and it's something that we're going to have to look at this session. The fund that we have set up, I think, was done through executive order. So I think we probably need to look at codifying that so we can put parameters on it and make sure that we have the ability to take funds in, outside funds, to build that account up so we have those funds available when we do have natural disasters within the Commonwealth. So, those are discussions to be had, but this state, this country has responded in full force, and all of us are very grateful for that who were affected, and ask that you please keep those who have lost first, those who have lost family members and loved ones, keep them in your prayers, and those who are rebuilding their lives, keep them in your prayers. And, right now, probably the best thing that people in the Commonwealth can do is to send money to the funds that are established either in the county or the state fund. The other resources are there, and I think that would be most effective right now. But make sure whatever donation you make is going to be utilized properly as much as you can, and I think that's important. But we do remember all those folks, and pray that they're able to build their lives again, and pray for them as they grieve for their loved ones. Okay. Before we get into the discussion with the cabinet today, we had a little bit of miscommunication. We had originally hoped to have the Department of Corrections here to talk about the commutations and the release of inmates during the pandemic. If you all remember, I had requested information from the Department of Corrections related to those who were released early, and getting details on exactly what good time they were given as part of their release. I did not receive that information after a second request. What we do receive is just basic numbers without any detail justifying the early release as far as what good time that in particular inmate had earned or was given. And I would look at this point that we will be utilizing the subpoena power of this committee to get those records. I would like to hope that it's just an honest oversight or something that there's a legitimate reason for this. But I struggle to believe that the Department of Corrections would release inmates without knowing in detail whether or not they met the qualifications to be released under the conditions set by the governor. So it's a little concerning that we're having so much difficulty getting that information, but it's why we changed this committee to be able to issue those subpoenas, and folks are going to answer for why they have not given us that information, and also answer with an expectation that we do get that information. So, but there was some miscommunications. We'd hoped to have the commissioner or the secretary here today, but that's not going to happen. The next item of business that we have has to do with the contracts that have been issued during the pandemic dealing with testing and vaccine. And what we had really wanted Department of Health to do is just kind of give an overview of how these contracts were done, what rules as far as procurement, that process. And I know with the declared emergency that there were probably some changes in that process, but just to get to understand that better and who got the contracts. If you look in your folder, you'll see a list of the companies that were granted contracts through this, and I think through the commissioner's presentation, I'm sure it's going to generate some questions on why and how things happen. So with that being said, Commissioner Stack, are you there, sir?
I am, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and who do you have there with you? Is it just you?
I have with me our budget director, Mike Tuggle, who's off screen if I need his assistance. And then we have other members from the cabinet with Kelly Rodman zooming in there.
Okay, very good. Commissioner, if you would, please introduce yourself for the record, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. So my name's Stephen Stack. I'm the Commissioner for Public Health at the Kentucky Department for Public Health. And let me just very briefly add my condolences and my heartfelt concern and thoughts and prayers for the folks in the tornado impacted areas. I went down I drove down with the state epidemiologist and a couple other of our leaders down to Mayfield 2 days ago, and we saw Mayfield and Dawson Springs, Morton's Gap, where the train came off the tracks, and then Bremen. And we spent some time with the local health department leaders down there, seeing the communities and the damage. And others have already very adequately described the devastation that this represents for the communities. As sad as that all is, it really is inspiring to see people coming together. So folks are all pitching in, helping each other out, and already starting the process. So I'm sure what the governor and others saw the first morning looked very different from what I saw on morning 4. The cleanup efforts have been heroic, and people are clearly pulling together. So we'll get through this, and the communities clearly are a resource and support for each other, and public health is here to support those communities in the weeks and the months ahead as we address other issues. To your specific question, Mr. Chair, as I understand it, it would be to explain sort of the journey we've been on a little bit for how we have used the resources that were available and obtained partners in providing testing and vaccination services throughout the pandemic. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes, sir. That'd be an excellent place to start.
Well, thank you. So remember when this started back last year in the early part of 2020, there was no test available. And in fact, the only place in the country you could do the testing was CDC in Atlanta. And then late February, March, we were able to do a very small volume of testing at the state public health lab. And that was the only place in Kentucky who could provide the test. As we went deeper into March and really the beginning of April and beyond, we were able to expand testing in the United States to highly sophisticated molecular diagnostic labs. Now, these are places that are very customized and have to go through a number of enhanced regulatory approvals because of the very precise nature of what they do. It was at that point in time that we were able to start expanding the availability to testing to the community. But it was very scarce and there were very few labs. And in fact, there were very, very few labs. Could count on one hand the number of people, labs in Kentucky who had the capacity to do this sort of testing. And so we, at that point, were clearly solidly in the early part of the emergency. And that's when we found our initial partnership with Gravity Diagnostics, which I know has been well known to people in the community. At that point, we used emergency procurement and we struck a partnership with Gravity. They were able to procure and obtain swabs and testing materials, plastics and chemicals and things of that nature at a time when it was extraordinarily difficult. I think really because of the really intense efforts of the people at that particular laboratory. And I'm proud to say it's a Kentucky laboratory that was doing this. We partnered up with Kroger Corporation, who then volunteered their services. They didn't charge the Commonwealth. And you may remember we did widespread high volume testing. There were drive-through sites at a lot of different places. And so Gravity processed all those tests and Kroger provided the clinical staff and the registration services. And we went through multiple months where that was the primary way people could access testing. There really were no other places to get it. Except for health departments, where we also had some of the departments that were able to set up their own drive-through testings. There were a number of health departments that really distinguished themselves. Christian County did a particularly fantastic job setting up high-volume drive-through sites, processing lots and lots of folks for testing. And so that was the first contract. It was emergency procured, and it was done with Gravity Diagnostics. As we went forward in time, other labs and hospitals began to have access to resources and the ability to offer testing of different types, but it wasn't consistent or uniform. And at that point, we supported hospitals with that Gravity contract so that they could provide testing. I apologize, I don't know the exact number off the top, but I bet at some point we were supporting at least half or more of the hospitals in the entire state with testing through Gravity, through that system that we were operating. As hospitals were able to get their own materials, they started providing testing on their own, but there were resource constraints and limitations throughout the journey. We then moved forward to offer testing to nursing homes, because I think we all know that those are some of the hardest hit to the danger and the vulnerability of the population. At that point, we did a different procurement. We did what I use the term open RFP, but it's sort of an ongoing RFP. It's a multi-provider situation. And we defined the specifications of the contract, and then we made it available to any laboratory who met those specifications. And I think we had 14 or more labs for a big part of this journey who were supporting the nursing homes and some elderly communities across the entire Commonwealth. And we have continued to support them through this multi-provider contract, which is still open. So vendors can still apply for that contract and get in there and then offer their services to long-term care facilities. And the facilities get to pick from those vendors if they're on the approved list. And then as we continue to go forward, again, we're in the summertime now here in the fall. We used arrangements with some of our public universities, specifically University of Kentucky and University of Louisville, to try to increase testing when we had the surge in the summer, and then also again in the winter when it happened later. So we used, I think there's something called the university exclusion, where we were allowed to come up with an arrangement. UK used Kroger Field and had a very high throughput testing site. University of Louisville used multiple different locations to provide testing in the Louisville area. So we partnered with them. In the instance of U of L, they sent the specimens to be processed through Gravity, which we had that arrangement with. In the instance of University of Kentucky, they provided those services on their own and subsequently had a subcontract. And that's with the other vendor you're familiar with, which is Wild Health. And that was their vendor that they obtained for that. And that's how Wild Health came into the testing picture for us. As we go forward in time from there, we started to begin to get access to antigen testing and other types of resources. So the variety and ways we got them were a little bit different sometimes. Initially, the federal government gave us almost 1.3 million of these little Binax Now cards, which we distributed widely throughout the state for people to use. And there was no contract with that. That was, if you met the eligibility criteria, we distribute that. And we submitted a report yesterday as required from the legislative special session that sort of outlines, there's a pie graph in that, the types of places that received those tests, but it was a wide variety of different settings for vulnerable populations and at-risk populations. And then going forward further, we found out this spring that of 2021 that we received a new federal grant specifically to provide testing in K through 12 schools. And we found out in the spring, and of course, when you learn about this stuff in March or April, you don't have a lot of time to execute a high complexity program that's got to cover 120 different counties, as variable as ours are in Kentucky. So we use that open RFP process again. And we currently have 25 or more labs who are participating in that program. And we are currently testing in close to 105 of the 120 counties right now. And we're testing at just under 1,300 schools across the Commonwealth. And again, that's a multi-provider arrangement. There's 25 vendors who are in it. There are probably 9 or 10 who are doing most of the work, or, most or all of the work in there. And they did that by reaching out to the schools, or the schools could go to our website and pick the vendors and contact them and describe what they needed and work with the vendors directly. So that sort of describes, and I'll leave that as my overview for the testing, and I'll just touch, the vaccination will be a simpler description. There's probably details in there that if you have questions, I'm happy to answer, but that sort of gives a description of the journey for testing. With respect, most recently, the federal government has its own procurement where they were able to get discounted rates to get these Binax Now cards, where we can buy a box of 40 for $200. So it's $5 a test. So we do have a contract with through, the federal government has made available to be able to purchase those Binax Now cards, but we purchase those and distribute those at no cost to sites around the state who meet the eligibility criteria. For vaccination, it's briefer. There's really only been one contract that had 2 iterations, if you will. There was the first contract, which was initially done. I think what we did, we had a number of vendors who offered us proposals and if there's details in this, we'd have to kind of go into it. I think this was ultimately done under emergency procurement, I think, but we had at least 3 different vendors who offered proposals. And one of them was a big, like, Fortune 500 company. One of them was another established testing sort of company. And then the third one was the one we've used, which is Wild Health, which is here in Kentucky. The other companies required guaranteed minimums. So if they set up a site, whether one person or 1,000 people went through, they were going to get, I think it was a couple $100,000 a day, no matter how many people did or didn't show up. It put much of the risk on the Commonwealth, and the prices were, quite frankly, outlandish. And the pricing that Wild Health offered required no guarantees. They assumed all risk. So if they showed up and 2 people showed up, they didn't get anything except the payment for the 2 people they vaccinated. And their rates were more competitive than the other 2. So we had those 3 proposals, and Wild Health was the one that was selected. And that served us for a few months. And then when we entered the new fiscal year, so starting July 1st, this current fiscal year, we now have an open RFP where any vendor, again, who meets the criteria is able to get in and do that. And so we have a small pharmacy, I think in Taylor County, who offer services just within their smaller service area. And we have a third vendor who's now going through the process. And I would suspect will be a third vendor against that contract, in addition to Wild Health. And of course, I don't want to leave out here. I cannot begin to emphasize, and if y'all would give a great shout of gratitude to your local health department leaders, they have been enormously, they've done so much in this response: vaccinating, testing, contact tracing, educating, informing, reassuring. And so we have devoted substantial resources to supporting the local health departments. At one point, for the testing part, we had 4 different local health departments: Kentucky River, Lincoln Trail, Purchase District Health Department, and Ashland Boyd. Those 4 health departments stood up community-based testing, and we specifically sourced them or resourced them so they could do that. And again, we're allowed to contract with those local health departments differently because they're quasi-governmental entities. So again, there's a variety of means we can use: emergency procurement, open RFPs, standard RFPs. The Finance Cabinet's currently going through an active regular RFP where there's competitive bidding and people are all going to make their proposals and they'll go through that process. That's in the process right now. So I think we've used a variety of tools, the university exclusions, MOAs with nonprofits, to try to get as much testing as efficiently, equitably, and hopefully transparently as possible to the people across the Commonwealth. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chair, and be available for any questions you have or clarifications you desire.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. A couple questions. The BuyNext cards, explain that to me again. Are those are do-it-yourself tests?
Yeah. So the BuyNext Now cards, they look like little pregnancy tests almost. They're little cardboard rectangles. You can buy them if you can find them. They're hard to get right now because everyone wanted them, but you can buy them at Walgreens 2 for $24. But those are packaged for the consumer with instructions how to use them and what to do. The ones we get are packaged for medical professionals, and they come, actually, this is one of the benefits. We'll do a little show and tell for you because I'm in my office. They come in a box like this. 40 tests are in here. And when you only get one developer though, and they come in little packages like this. So we can ship those out to homeless shelters, health departments. We send them to nursing homes. We've sent them to jails. Sorry, I got a dry spot. We've sent them to universities and colleges in some settings. And then they can use these as long as they have access to a laboratory provider to make sure they're doing it properly. And so that's been very helpful. We're going to get them started. Now we're going to get, the federal government's buying over 300 million of these kind of things. This is Illume, which is one brand. Quidel is another brand. So they're going to buy a whole bunch of these different point of care tests. And then they're going to distribute those directly to FQHCs, to vulnerable populations like nursing homes or jails. Look at that, Mr. Chair. You didn't even ask me a hard question yet, and you got me rattled. Okay. But anyway, so we're going to get over 300 million of these across the country in early next year that are going to be available to distribute out to people, because the federal government wants to make these available for free to folks so that they can test themselves in their own home and not have to go get healthcare costs associated with it.
So the test is done in home, and then they send it to the lab?
No. So I just did one of these before I went down and visited the tornado area. This one here, you download an app for your smartphone, and you follow it. Shows you a little video. You follow the instructions. You swab yourself, and it provides in 15 minutes. On your smartphone, it shows you you're positive or you're negative, and it tells you what to do. These here, these Binax Now cards that I showed, these are just like a pregnancy test. 2 stripes, you're positive. 1 stripe, you're negative. And you just look at it after 15 minutes. And if there's a second stripe, then you have COVID.
And, I've been hearing a lot of information on some of the in-home tests about accuracy. Are to your knowledge and information that you've received, are there some brands that are more accurate than others, or what should the people be looking out for with those tests?
It's a great question. So when we were back last year, and there were only a couple of these different tests, and there was a lot of uncertainty about, are they accurate enough? Should we use them or shouldn't we? In what setting? There was more uncertainty. We're at a very different place now. So we all know COVID's everywhere, right? I mean, unfortunately, it's spread everywhere. It's in communities all around. We've got to find ways to normalize. How can we live with COVID and go on with our lives, not have it disrupt us the same way, but still be responsible so we're not knowingly infecting people? These tests are not as reliable as a PCR test. The PCR tests almost never have a false positive and almost never have a false negative. They are incredibly sensitive and reliable. These tests may miss people who are either very early in the illness or very late in the illness when the viral load is lower. But that's okay for what we're trying to do. If we make them really cheap and people have them and they got a fever and a cough and they say, I want to make sure I don't have COVID so I don't go spreading it. If you got a fever and a cough and you have a negative test, you probably can feel pretty good you don't have COVID, because if you got that many symptoms, it should find it. And if it's negative, you're not likely, if you've collected the sample well, you're not likely to have COVID and spread it around. You probably have the common cold or something else. So at this point, if we make these widespread available at a very low cost or free, then the whole focus changes. It's not about finding every single person who has the disease. It's about empowering people who are likely to have the disease to test themselves, be responsible, and just not spread it to other people. So it gets much more refined. I hope that helps to clarify a little bit.
Yes, sir, it does. Okay, if you don't mind, let's back up a little bit. When you, in the initial stages of this, with the contracts that we did, Gravity was a known entity within the Commonwealth, correct? An established business?
Correct, in Northern Kentucky.
Okay, and if I understood correctly, they contracted with Wild Health to help take care of some of the testing, correct?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Gravity is a lab, does its own thing. University of Kentucky. So when we did this arrangement with the 2 universities, U of L and UK, U of L said, hey, if you can just help support our staffing costs, to collect the specimen, process it, inform the patient, we'd rather just send the specimens out to Gravity and they could run it. And so we did it that way. With UK said, hey, we'll just take care of it ourselves. Is that okay? We'll provide the full service. And we said yes. And the way they ended up doing it, they started running it themselves. And then I think they had Wild Health started helping them, and then Wild Health did a really good job. And so they ended up subcontracting with Wild Health to provide the service. So we don't have a direct testing contract for general community testing with Wild Health. It's University of Kentucky, and they're a sub to UK for us.
Okay, and why did we go with Wild Health for vaccines?
Well, so we had these 3 different companies. One of them was a big disaster relief company. Another one was a testing company, both out of state, but really large enterprises. and then Wild Health. The three of them offered a proposal. The other two offered unsolicited proposals. And then Wild Health offered one. And we lined all those up and looked at the cost and what they were offering. And quite frankly, we would have had to pay a fortune to those other two companies for little to no work at times if people didn't show up. So Wild Health assumed all the risk if no one came. They had already demonstrated their ability to provide services through testing because they were doing that in a variety of places already. And they were a local in-state provider familiar with the territory with the workforce in state. We were worried some of those other vendors would overpromise and underdeliver because they were going to have to go out and recruit a workforce. And I think we all know how hard it is to find these individuals to do this healthcare work. So Wild Health got picked because when we lined up the three opportunities side by side, they were the preferable one in just about every category.
Okay. And Wild Horse or Wild Health, I don't know why I always say Wild Horse, but you do. Wild Health, they are a company that has been operating within the Commonwealth and has a history of providing this type of service. Is that correct?
So Wild Health does, as I understand it, they have do lifestyle and health and personal wellness medicine. But they had the reason they were able to get into this quickly is because they had a laboratory that did molecular diagnostic testing for people, like genetic testing and counseling people about their risk for different conditions. So they had a laboratory and they had a clinical workforce and they had knowledge and expertise about how to do these sorts of things. And so they entered this type of, well, remember, when I say they entered this business, just about everybody in this business entered it last year because COVID didn't exist till last year. So they got into this kind of activity to provide testing services, and then that naturally evolved for them into vaccination services because they hired clinicians to do this work.
Okay. I have been told that this company is owned by the son of a former governor. Is that accurate?
That I'm not familiar. I've not heard that, and I have no familiarity with that.
Okay.
It's never come up in any of our discussions with them.
Okay. And one of the issues that I've dealt with specifically with a doctor at home was concern that some of these companies like Wild Health are becoming competitors in local markets that they have within their region at providing services. Wild Health is becoming a competitor. And there was some concern about that, but as I understand it, the RFP has been opened up, so any physician who has services, maybe where they go into business industry to provide healthcare services, they would have the ability to apply to be a provider now also. Is that correct?
Well, it's correct up to a point, but I have to add a little to it to be really correct. So the funding sources for some of these are specific to certain populations. So the federal grant for K through 12 testing is only allowed to be used to test the K through 12 community. So there is an open RFP for entities who want to provide testing in the K through 12 setting. So if a physician office wanted to provide testing specifically in the K through 12 testing, yes, that RFP is still open and they can still do it. We have an FQHC in Eastern Kentucky who's doing exactly that. We have an FQHC down in the Lake Cumberland district area that's doing this. So we have FQHCs who are doing exactly that, sir, and are providing testing in the schools under that open RFP, just like these other vendors. We have testing contracts for the nursing homes, for the long-term care facilities. And if a physician practice were able to, wanted to go in and do that, and a nursing home said, we want to use that entity as our partner, they could apply for that. But I want to be honest about it. I mean, it'd be challenging for a small physician office to provide all the testing to like a nursing home if they, if you have 80 residents and all the staff and have to do twice weekly testing, but they could apply for those. But in general, we don't have just open tests per se to go and test anyone you want to, or just your own medical practice. The grant requirements have required us to make it available to the general public for anyone who wants it, or to specific settings like jails or nursing homes or schools. So the RFPs are described for the population that the funding is allowed to be used for. So I hope that helps clarify.
It does, and this particular provider has not just a regular practice. He goes into the workplace and provides services for entire businesses. So it's a large scale operation, and there was some concern there. One of the questions that has also come up with all the efforts to get people vaccinated and all the resistance to get vaccinated, probably the one person that most people will listen to is their own physician. And I know there are some logistics because of the vaccines and the requirements for storage. Do you feel like we could have made and should make more efforts to get the vaccines to primary care physicians that really do have relationships with their patients that would perhaps make them much more comfortable taking the vaccine, hearing it from their own doctor, and being administered by their own doctor?
Well, having people with their own doctor, Senator, is absolutely a high priority. And I mean, I'm a physician and practice medicine right up till this job. So absolutely, we agree with that. One of the challenges in the very beginning, if you remember, there was only Pfizer and Moderna, and the Pfizer was only shipped in increments of 1,170 doses, and we might only get 13 or 14,000 doses. So that's only 11 or 12 shipments. So it was not possible to distribute it widely. We couldn't even get it to all the hospitals who wanted it because we couldn't break it down and separate it. The Moderna was a little easier, but not much. And then there was the storage. We don't have those problems now. We could ship to folks. I think the biggest impediment now is a lot of doctors. So doctors' offices can sign up, and we have doctors' offices who have signed up. We have over 1,600 individually registered vaccination sites in the Commonwealth. The biggest problem as I see it is the federal government, because they have solely purchased all these vaccines and distribute them at no cost to anyone receiving them, have very specific requirements that a vaccine site has to sign in order to participate. It requires daily and or weekly inventory reporting. It requires reporting your doses to the vaccine registries, and it requires very strict compliance with temperature monitoring and other things for the vaccine to ensure integrity. And those requirements, which are all federal, are actually quite burdensome. And so I think a lot of small physician practices have looked at that and said, there's no way I can take that on. I'm already overrun and busy as it is, and I can't take it on. So that is an impediment. And we continue to talk with the Medical Association, and other professional associations. Certainly FQHCs and RHCs have all pretty much taken this up and are doing it. But Senator, we agree with you. We need to get this better and better into doctors' offices so that regular physicians who patients trust, who can sit down and answer their questions and help them to feel comfortable with their own personal choice, can have that dialogue with them. So we're aligned in that. It's just that the federal requirements, I think, are difficult for the smaller operations to comply with.
Very good. Any member have a question? Representative Fleming.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Stack, a quick question. I know you've gone through a laborious process and trying to juggle so many aspects. And I just want to ask you a question for down the road, and that is, given where you are at this point and the things you've learned, how do you stand right now in terms of when, hopefully this won't happen, but something else comes down the pipe a year, 2 years down the road, or maybe 10 years down the road? How you position yourself in terms of distribution of the vaccines, the testing, communications with all the health providers and so forth? Could you give us an assessment on on our situation, how we can prepare for the next one? Are we going to be blown away like we did last time, or do you feel that we made significant process, even though it might not be perfect? We'll be much better positioned to handle the situation.
Well, Representative, I think it's a good question, and I thank you for it. this has been unprecedented, and I think anyone's living memory for this kind of response. I mean, you have to go back to 1918 really to see a pandemic of this impact. And so there will certainly be things we look back on and wish could have unfolded differently. I think the biggest challenge has been the difficulties in messaging, because there's been a lot of inconsistency in messaging over 2 years, and it's caused confusion at times. And unfortunately, we've got a division on a public health issue where the science is actually pretty clear now, but people have received information from different sources and reached very divergent conclusions. I don't think it's the science and the medicine that was the problem. I think it's human behavior. And you could read Shakespeare, or you could read Homer, and or any of the Greek tragedies, and you could see that behavior is just part of who we are as human beings. That's the bigger challenge. But let me encourage you all, if you're open to this. We just submitted yesterday a 20-page report that was required by the legislature. It talks about the testing journey in general, K through 12, and about the monoclonal antibody program that we stood up as a consequence of the special session. I hope, as you think next year and we go through the regular session, you think about just the gratitude we owe these state employees who have done all this work. Now, remember, I'm an interloper. I'm an appointed commissioner. Okay, so I'm talking about the team that works here. We have essentially had to build an entire testing infrastructure for a single disease that didn't exist before we did this. And it had to evolve over times of scarcity, differential funding sources, different types of testing, different settings. We had to then deploy vaccines. Now, remember this, even though there's just over 60% of Kentuckians, are vaccinated at the moment, fully vaccinated. Think about 60% of Kentuckians are fully vaccinated as we sit here today. And it was just 2 days ago that the very first vaccine ever was available in the world. And so we had to, that's what almost killed me, quite frankly, gentlemen and ladies, was the vaccine deployment, was trying to figure out how to deploy that December, January, February, March, April last year, and get it to all the places that we needed to when there was nowhere near enough to go around. We now deploy monoclonal antibodies, and now we have the Merck pill that's coming out, and there'll be the Pfizer pill shortly after it. So the little Department of Public Health, in partnership with the local health departments and all of our hospitals and FQHCs and RHCs, we've had to essentially run very complex small business startups over and over and over again to build systems, build teams, and find ways to deploy all of this. So I know there's always a skepticism, not specifically for you, Representative, but in general, it always sounds like we're patting ourselves on the back. I just cannot tell you how proud I am of how much the little engine that could sort of produced throughout this difficult journey. If I could do something different going forward, I sure would hope we could find a way at the very beginning to not make personal or political some of the basic public health science, because I find ourselves tearing at each other for things that we should generally agree on, and then save our energy to fight about other stuff. And so that would be the biggest thing. It's the human sociology and psychology, not the science.
Yeah, I think your 2 points in terms of the distribution network, are trying to get that established. And even though you had current systems in place, and that's nothing on, it's just the way it is. It's just very difficult to get that out. And I concur with that. And the other point, I think you're spot on, and that's the human behavior. And people react quite differently, and it's hard to control that. And given the chaos and the uncertainty in the beginning of that, to try to control the narrative, and I use the word control loosely, is very, very difficult, because everybody wants to know, and we're becoming to an instant gratification society. To try to get that information out there and accurate is very difficult. So I do appreciate the efforts y'all go through. I think this committee and other folks recognize that it was a stress and strain on the system, but we do appreciate what you go through. And yes, some of us have been harsher than the others, but we understand. But the bottom line, I think we're all in this together to try to find the optimal solution. So I do appreciate a lot of the efforts you're going through, and I feel confident we'll have a system set up in terms of getting a deployment of the vaccine and testing in a better environment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative Fleming. Commissioner, help me understand something. At the beginning of the pandemic, I remember we had a lot of discussion about numbers, positivity rates, that type of thing. And I know that you all admitted that some of the information you were getting was incomplete. You weren't getting all the test results. Was that information coming from labs out of state, or what? In retrospect, what was that difficulty?
Well, yeah, and let me tie this back into what the representative just asked. Like, will we be better off next time? I hope in some ways we will. So this is a very pointed response for the representative's question and yours, Senator Carroll. A lot of labs were not set up with our Kentucky Health Information Exchange to submit laboratory results electronically. I think we all know if it comes in from one computer to another and it can be processed and a machine can analyze it and get it all ready for us, that's a lot more efficient. A lot of labs were coming in from either a fax on paper or e-fax. So people were sending it from a computer in an e-fax, and some other human at the other end had to look at it and then type it back into another computer to take the data. As you can imagine, you're processing hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of tests. You can't keep up with that. And so what we did do, this is an incredible success, is we onboarded scores of labs onto the Kentucky Health Information Exchange, and they submit electronically. And those RFPs that we talked about earlier, as a requirement of those RFPs, those vendors have to submit data through the Health Information Exchange, which enables us to get the information electronically for it to more quickly get to a local health department to know there's a positive test and they have to take some action, and actually to help us educate and inform the patients. So that system has been improved substantially. And yes, if we were to have another pandemic, I hope not. I mean, I hope it's the next commissioner. I hope it's 15 commissioners after me has to deal with this. But if there's one down the road, labs are already hooked up with us. And so theoretically, we should start getting information more quickly, more accurately at a much earlier stage. We had to build that whole system in the beginning. So that was a big part of the challenge, Senator.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about the monoclonal antibodies. There was a lot of discussion about some perception that this treatment was not being utilized enough, and which obviously the legislation that we had during special session kind of addressed that. And Commissioner, I kind of feel like today even that it's still not being used like it should. And case in point, a young lady I know lives in the Bowling Green area. She was diagnosed with COVID, was very sick. The physician did not even give her the option of an infusion, and we talked to her and explained to her, sent her some information on that, and they almost, from what I understand, it took some persuasion to even get the doctor to order that for this young lady, and then she did get it, and 24, 48 hours, she was much, much better. So do you have a different perspective on that treatment now than you did? And it just seemed like that we weren't. To me, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there were people that died that perhaps those infusions could have saved their lives. And it almost seems like that particular treatment in itself became a political issue because Governor DeSantis was pushing it so hard, and then the federal government took control of the supply, and it seems like in Kentucky that just wasn't a priority for us. A lot of questions, a lot of statements in that. Can you please respond?
Sure. No, I appreciate it. So the monoclonals, they have been useful. They've been useful from the start. I don't think the pushback on them is utility. It was if people were seeing that as an alternative to vaccination, and the vaccination prevents you from getting severely sick. You have to actually get sick to get the monoclonals. So you intervene at a later stage. So you actually take more risk if you wait till that point to intervene. The other thing is we can't afford, how many of us are concerned, probably all of us, about the cost of all of this that's going on in society. we could immunize someone fully with a vaccine for like $40, for the vaccine cost. Monoclonal, the current price the federal government's paying for is $2,100 a dose. So you're talking about a much more expensive way to do it as well. And then the other part is vaccines are abundant now, but the monoclonals, the supply is not sufficient. So the reason the federal government intervened was when the Delta surge came. Now I'm sorry, Senator, but you're asking good questions. So you cut me off if I'm telling you more than you want, but I love to share this information for folks. And so I'm grateful for the chance. Before the Delta variant showed up, and so in Kentucky, that was around June. There may have been a little bit in there late May, but June and then into July. July was full swing in Delta variant. In May and April, if you were fully vaccinated, you were almost bulletproof to COVID. It worked that well. It was like almost a complete protection against the earlier variant, which was the British variant and the original one. Then Delta came along and it was more vicious, and it hit people harder and it hit younger people more. And so when that happened, the vaccines were still very effective, but you started to see a little bit more of the breakthrough cases, and there was younger people who were not vaccinated who were getting sick. So the monoclonals, and then of course you mentioned Governor DeSantis, and he and others, rose to prominence of that. We started consuming so many monoclonals. There was more than a 19-fold increase in demand over a very short period, over like a matter of a month or 6 weeks. And it way outstripped the whole national supply, like just that quick. And so the federal government then intervened in early September. And this was right around the time when you guys were going to come in for the special session. They intervened and they took away, it used to be that the sites could just order the monoclonals directly through the distributor. They stopped that. There was a week and a half or two where really nothing was going out. And then they said the states have to step in and essentially apportion or ration the limited amount and figure out how to distribute that. And then that was around the time the special session was happening. And then what we did, and I do think this was an improvement, and we did this because of the legislation, we got up a website where the public could go and see the sites, but we had to have financing to be able to support the sites to do that, which we didn't have, and the appropriation gave that funding. Because you can imagine if people want something and it's hard to find, their phones will ring off the hook and the demand on their staff escalates. So we had to be able to support them additionally to take on that extra role. And so this operation we have running now, and we had a coordination call today. We meet regularly with the monoclonal sites who are on the website, and we supply them with the antibodies. We explain to them the new information that we've learned from the CDC and other sources, answer questions, and it's running very smoothly. But now we're back in a problem again where the monoclonal sites in Kentucky requested this current 2-week period, because they allocate to the state every 2 weeks, requested 10,000 treatment courses of monoclonals, but the federal allocation was only 4,000. So only 4,000 people can be treated, but the sites are saying we want enough to treat 10,000, and there's just no more out there for us to get. So we talk, and I'd encourage you, any of those sites on the website, if you know people who are part of those entities, go talk to them and ask them about the program and how we administer it. It's a very collaborative, very transparent process. We work with the Hospital Association. We work with hospitals. FQHCs are in there. There's some smaller medical practices, and like Buffalo Trace only has one provider, but then again, it's a much more sparse area as far as the healthcare infrastructure. But they all participate with us. And I would agree with you, sir. We would like to make sure everybody who needs it, everyone who meets the eligibility criteria, and there's a lot of people who meet the eligibility criteria, we would like everybody to have it, but there's just not been enough supply. But the infrastructure is there to deliver it now, and the public can access it by going straight to the KY COVID website, the monoclonal antibody page, and just find one that's near them and call them at the phone number that's on the webpage. But I don't want to say it's effortless, because there's not enough to go around. So sites are probably having to make difficult decisions and prioritize the highest risk among a lot of people they'd like to give it access to.
So what is it about these treatments that does it take longer to produce these treatments, or why are they in such short supply?
I don't have an answer for that. So there's 3 of them available currently. And I think there are 3 different pharmaceutical companies who manufacture them. And these are complex synthetic proteins. So they got to have, I'm sure, special laboratory equipment and manufacturing processes. And you have the entire nation, essentially seeking these in large numbers. So I don't know, but I suspect it's just normal manufacturing, science, production. I suspect there's just difficulties producing so much so fast, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. So before the legislature appropriated the funding to step up these efforts, were there not other funding resources that the cabinet could have used to access more of these treatments? And I can remember a previous committee meeting we had, maybe in health and welfare, where there was really not much data on the monoclonal antibody treatments. And in my mind, it led me to believe that not much emphasis or importance was being put on those treatments. So help me understand that. I mean, I have heard story after story of people taking these treatments, and 24 hours later, they've gone from deathly ill to feeling 100% better. So do you feel like that we were late getting on board with this? Or were there other funding sources that we could have used to step up those programs?
Well, so there's 2 or 3 questions you had in there. The one about funding sources, let me do that first. The only funding source we could have possibly tapped for this might have been FEMA funding, because we had no other dedicated grants. We didn't have any more CARES funding for it. We had not had any appropriations for ARPA funding. And FEMA funding is tricky. FEMA funding requires, if we're going to use it for something like this, that we are doing daily site inspections at every site that we're doing this. It's incredibly laborious, and it's not easy. I mean, we don't have any infrastructure to go visit all of these sites and scrutinize them like you would have to. Now, and then you'd have to set up a very large regional hubs to do this kind of stuff. And Senator, I don't want to sit here and tell you it can't be done. We've done it for testing. We've done it for vaccination. We've done it for a lot of things. I would just say there's just only so much bandwidth and only so many healthcare providers in the state. And so even when you gave us the resource with ARPA and then, the special session, we were able to make use of hospitals, health systems, FQHCs in a much more distributed network, which made it possible. But if we had to go stand up 8 large mega regional sites and do this, we just don't have the healthcare workforce in the state. And that was an impediment to do this. As far as the effectiveness of the treatment, I don't dispute that with you. It is an effective treatment. It's a very useful treatment. And if we had more of it, we would give more of it. And then prior to, say, September of this year, there were already 104 sites who were already registered and receiving monoclonals. So we were already giving monoclonals. I think where the gap was the general public couldn't go to a website or go to a standardized place and say, okay, I need to get a monoclonal. Where can I look? And then go essentially look at a shopping mart and find a place. But we were already giving it throughout communities all over the state in 104 different sites. So we were using it, but I guess we weren't using it in as high profile a way, whereas in certain other states, they made they promoted very, very prominently what they were doing in different places. We were making sure the sites had it and it was getting used. But I would agree with you that it helps now for the public to have a place to go and say, hey, I don't have a doctor who does this, so how can I get it? Now they can go and look, and if supply is sufficient, they should be able to get it. But supply is not sufficient, which is the big problem.
Okay, I fear that we should have promoted it more than what we did, and we didn't because of what you just said, and fear that it would lead to people not getting vaccinated and depending on the treatments. But with that being said, I wonder if there are lives that could have been saved had we pushed those treatments more than we did. Just in one final question related to these lines, the Merck and the Pfizer pill, Is that the chemical makeup of those medications? Is it similar to the monoclonal treatments?
No, not at all.
Something totally different?
Yeah, think of Tamiflu. It's more like a Tamiflu for the flu. You want me to expound, or is that sufficient?
It as effective as the monoclonal antibodies, or less effective?
No. So the Merck pill, molnupiravir, that pill, the final data that came out, it's not nearly as effective as they had hoped. They thought it reduced like hospitalization and severe illness by about 50%. And then the final data, when it came out, it probably reduces risk of hospitalization or progression from mild, moderate to severe disease by about 30%. Still useful, still valuable, but it's not like the monoclonals. The monoclonals have like a 75% plus effective rate. This is much lower. Now the Pfizer data, now that's still preliminary too, that shows a much higher effective rate. It's probably close to 89% is what they were initially saying. But the challenge with these two pills, the Pfizer pill has to be given within 3 days of your symptom onset. So you got to act quick. As far as the molnupiravir, the Merck pill, you have to start it within 5 days of your symptoms. And unfortunately, there's all sorts of concerns about you can't be pregnant or soon going to get pregnant. And you also you have to be concerned about some medication to medication interactions. And you have to have a positive test, to confirm that so there's a lot of logistical challenges with that. And then the quantities, again, believe me, any frustration you share, sir, I will match you with. I want to get out of the pharmaceutical business. I hope you understand. I want to get out of the pharmaceutical distribution business and let the for-profit companies that do this for a living, who have all these systems to it, it would be really appreciated, but very tiny quantities to give out. So it's gonna be hard to find initially, and all of us have groused about that. Who do my kind of job across the country.
Okay, I am very curious on the monoclonal treatments, about that process and the time frame to produce those treatments. If they are that effective, I would think that needs to be a major priority to get the supply of those drastically increased. Commissioner, if you can find any information on that as far as how long it takes to produce whatever number, to kind of put that in perspective, I would very much, and I think this committee would very much appreciate that information.
I heard you. So what I'll have to do is, then I'll do this for you. I'll have to ask the people at the CDC or Health and Human Services if they can give me that information. I don't have that access to that myself.
Okay, I think we may have one more question. Representative Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Stack, thank you so much for your leadership throughout these last couple of years. My question is the new strain, the Omicron strain that we're seeing here in the United States, and what things we should be prepared for and looking to, and will these same treatments be effective against that strain?
Right, so thank you. The Omicron is not, as we sit here today, it is not a big thing in Kentucky at the moment, but that could change literally in weeks. I think you saw the news coverage perhaps with some of the colleges or universities in the New England area that Omicron has reached them. In the federal government, they were saying all the way up until last week that more than 99% of all virus in the United States for COVID was Delta. Now it's 3% is Omicron, and is what I was heard on a recent briefing. They report that the virus may double every 2 days, which means that 3% can go to 6 to 12 to 24, and there's your only 12 days. What is that? It's 8 days. 8 days into it, you could go very quickly to be 1/4 of all of the virus in a community. So Omicron clearly appears to spread much more rapidly or effectively than some of the other strains. It's not yet clear that it's more serious, though. And in fact, if it's a little less serious, that could be helpful. But if large numbers of people get infected, it still can cause a problem. As far as the vaccines, the early data shows that if you're fully vaccinated recently after your second dose, or boosted if you're more than 6 months after your mRNA vaccine, that the vaccines still should have very good protection for severe disease and death. But they may not protect you from getting very mild illness, where you feel like you have the common cold instead of severe disease. So that would mean that more people could get infected and potentially spread the disease. But if you're vaccinated, you're still not likely to get seriously ill or die from it. As far as the monoclonals, the evidence is still out, but there is concern that the changes in Omicron could undermine the effectiveness of some of those monoclonal antibodies. And that's obviously a real big concern, because then we'd go from not having enough right now to not having it at all, or incredibly scarce if it undermines the effectiveness. And I don't have any firm decisions from the federal government on that yet, but we're watching that carefully. And then as far as the Merck pill and the Pfizer pill, those work in a very different way. And so those should still work, whether it's Omicron or whether it's Delta, because those block a specific enzyme inside the cell, that works with the virus. And so that should not be impacted, whether it's Omicron or Delta. So Representative, I hope that helps answer your questions. And the things that work, folks, we are not last year. No one's saying you can't go to work. No one's saying we can't do activities. No one's saying we should not enjoy the company of our friends and family at Christmas and at New Year's and at other holidays in this month. We should all still be thoughtful and careful, though. I mean, if we're going to go out in public places, try to do it outdoors if we can. Try to keep some space between each other. If you're sick, please, if you're sick, if you have a fever, a cough, a runny nose, a sore throat, please don't go to parties and gatherings. If there's one thing we could all hopefully do, is not knowingly spread disease, whatever the type of disease it is. I think if we just exercise some extra care and prudence, wash our hands often, that's not even a mask I'm talking about yet. And then if you are around a whole lot of people you don't know, the masks are still helpful. They do help, but again, I'm not going to fall on my sword pushing that everywhere. I would encourage people to do it. I do it when I go out in most settings where I'm too close to people in public. And I think it still is very helpful to reduce the risk of spreading disease.
Vice Chair Beckler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now that Representative Jenkins brought up Omicron, I have a question. It's my understanding that the majority of the folks who've been identified with Omicron have already been vaccinated. Is that true?
Well, it may be, but if 60% of Kentuckians are vaccinated, then you start to get where the only, if you had 80% people vaccinated, well, then just about everybody who gets it is going to have been vaccinated, right? So that could very well be true, and it's consistent with what I just said. I think this virus spreads much more effectively. I don't know that it's more dangerous. It spreads much more effectively, and that is a risk. The risk that people who are vaccinated can get mild illness, it is very real. So the point that you just said could very well be true.
Using the 60% number and what you just said, then that kind of tells me that the over-the-top push for everybody to get vaccinated may be too much. Maybe we already have enough people vaccinated.
Well, I don't know that I would go there, because the reason Omicron is here now is because far too many people are able to get infected around the world still. And so it has millions and millions and tens and hundreds of millions of chances to mutate. And I remember, it's been mutating this whole time. And the only letters we're all talking about, right? We had Alpha, and we have Delta, and we have Omicron, right? Those are the only three Greek letters that most people are now familiar with because of this virus, out of how many billions of opportunities this virus has had to mutate. So if theoretically we got everybody vaccinated, we could shut a lot of this down, because it's not going to spread as easily. And then we're going to have less and less propagation and less opportunity to mutate. So no, I mean, whether it's smallpox or whether it's pertussis, the whooping cough, or whether it's polio, or in this case, whether it's COVID, the vaccines are the way we get it under control. But what the vaccines we hope the most for is that they prevent people from dying and having severe or disabling illness, right? Those are the highest priorities, and they still work very, very effectively for that. And we show that data at the press conference each week. It's on the website too, the KY COVID website. If you look at data, it says KDPH data on the data page. There's this chart pack we put, and I'll just use the mortality one for this one. If you are under 60 and you have died from COVID since July 1st, 95% of those people are unvaccinated. It's almost a COVID death under the age of 60 is almost entirely a preventable problem. If you are over 60, it's 73% of the deaths for persons over 60 in Kentucky from COVID were unvaccinated. That's since Delta came on the scene in July 1st, when it really was the predominant strain. So I agree with you. Omicron may mean that a lot more people who are vaccinated get mild illness, but being vaccinated will keep you at a mild illness, not at a hospitalization or a severe or life-threatening illness.
Yeah. Commissioner, we had some testimony in health and welfare about testing of the immune system for the presence of neutralizing antibodies and quantifying that level. And I've read recently that that's not something that the CDC recommends, as far as even if you do have what X level of neutralizing antibodies within your system, they still recommend the vaccination. Do you think there will come a point that having those types of lab tests just to quantify the level of those antibodies present, that we will be able to determine whether or not that person needs, let's say, a booster, that we can rely on those numbers and not have to follow through with boosters?
Senator, it's possible. And there are diseases where we do that for. So some of the hepatitis vaccines you get for, like hepatitis B, you can go in and get a test and see if you have sufficient protection to determine whether you need to be boosted or not. So when I got my hospital privileges at the Veteran Affairs Hospital, I had to have a titer to determine if I was still adequately protected. So it's theoretically possible that could be the case. We're not there yet. I don't know what the typical time frame is and what kind of data the scientists need to determine. Remember, we are just 1 year or 2 days ago from the very first approved vaccine, and we're only less than 2 years still from the time that this disease impacted us. Hepatitis has been around for very, very centuries, or longer. So we had years to build up that data and make those determinations. I think that's why we don't have some of that now. The other challenge, Senator, is going to be this. None of us get a titer to determine if our tetanus booster is good, right? So if we're out playing at the park and we cut our foot on a rusty nail, right, or we're working in the shed and we cut ourselves with a knife and we go to the hospital, they don't check a blood test. They just say it's time for a tetanus booster. And everybody says, okay, right, it's time for your tetanus booster. You got to cut and you got to get a protection. It is incredibly more cost effective to just boost the individual if it's safe than it is to do those tests, which may cost $150 or more, because a neutralizing antibody test is a more complex test than just, do you have the presence of an antibody or not? So there's more cost associated with it. But yeah, I think there is quite possibly a time when those tests will get better and we'll have better information about it.
Okay. I just wish that people were as comfortable with the vaccine for COVID as they are for the tetanus. I think that's really the whole point, and what we have failed on miserably is to make sure the public is comfortable and trust what they're being given, and unfortunately with a lot of the population we just haven't. Senator Thomas, you have a question, sir.
I do. And let me say, Dr. Stack, I always appreciate your wise and informative counsel. You've been one of our heroes, through this whole pandemic, through this whole struggle. I mean, I've had so many people come up to me and just talk about what an outstanding job and how wisdom and good advice you provide to the citizens of Kentucky. So I just always appreciate every time you appear before this committee. First, I want to say that I've got to ask the question that at least I hear so often. I'm sure others on this committee hear as well. But it's just simply this: when will we see an end to this? We're almost 2 years into this. People are really tired of it, but we're still in it, and it's still here. Do you have any ideas when we might see an end to this? What's the best information you're getting from the CDC and from Dr. Fauci's organization at this time?
Senator, first of all, thank you for your kind words. And second of all, I want this to be over. we all want this to, right? Look, it'd be nice to have us argue about other things, right? Wouldn't it be fun just for a difference, just to spar over some different stuff and not have life impacted by this? So I agree. Senator Carroll almost made me want to say we should have bourbon and celebrate that we agree. Wouldn't it be nice if people were as comfortable with the COVID vaccine as the tetanus booster? But Senator Thomas, I have not lost my confidence that this will become more normalized and not impact our lives the same way. And so, we've got the whole continent of Africa. And remember, we talk about the Commonwealth, but I hope it gives a little sense too. We actually have to look at the whole world. We got the nation and we got the world, but we got the whole continent of Africa. We got to get their immunizations up, right? So that's where the newest variant arose from, in a very low vaccinated community. But we could go to counties in Kentucky and find very low vaccinated rates, right? So what we need to do is hope that the number of people get vaccinated, coupled with whatever protective value there is from recovering from infection, and there is some. If you have been infected, you should have mounted immune response, and hopefully you do have some protection. So the combination of people who have recovered from infection, plus the people who have been vaccinated, plus the people who have had both, which is really, that's the best way to protect yourself, is to still be vaccinated even if you've been infected, is that over time, that the population will develop enough reservoir of protection that the virus no longer threatens or endangers whole hospitals being overrun and collapsing and crowding out other types of care. And if we get to a situation where COVID is more like the flu, because remember, in a bad flu season, we can still have thousands of people die, from tens of thousands nationally every year from the flu. If we got to that level, it would still be very sad. But society will move on, and we will have reduced the risk to a level that society will be able to accept and tolerate. Even if we don't like it, we still tolerate it and we move on. We're not there yet. We were all hoping that we'd get through this Delta surge, that we wouldn't have another thing, and then whoops, here comes this Omicron variant. So we got to have to push ahead, keep trying to get people vaccinated, that plus the combination of all these other folks who keep getting infected, which does include some of the vaccinated, that hopefully there's enough protection and then we get through this. Now, when will that happen? I think that I know that his name is polarizing, but that's where someone like Fauci, who's in his 80s, who's been doing this for decades, could probably give a different kind of perspective. From my sense, I would say, next year should progressively still look more and more normal. But it may not be until we get later in the year or even into the early next year where we've totally moved past any attention to this and it's just part of the regular background noise. But I think we're gradually moving better. Look at all the activity that's happening now, right? Even when the hospitals, unfortunately, were so distressed. If you didn't know, if you were in Kroger Stadium watching the UK football team play, you had no knowledge. If you were in that stadium or tailgating outside, that the hospital across the street had the National Guard in it because it was on the brink of not being able to, sustain the work it had to do, right? So the rest of society looks normal. So I just want to put in context, I think we have made a lot of progress. We just have to make a little more progress. And then I do think we can move on past dwelling on this as much as we do.
That's it, Senator Carroll. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. I have one final request, and Kelly, this may be more for you. I would ask that the cabinet please provide a list of owners and investors in Wild Horse or Wild Health. I did Wild Horse again. In Wild Health into that organization and provide that to committee staff, please.
I will take care of it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? Seeing none, this is obviously the last meeting of this committee for the interim. It is likely that we will meet during the session, and I would ask members that if you have topics that you feel need to be reviewed, we may be able to do that. Staff is requesting additional topics. If you have those, please bring those to myself or my co-chair, Nemus, and we will look at those and likely meet during the session to make those decisions. With that being said, I want to sincerely thank the staff. Jerry and your staff, you all have done an outstanding job. I appreciate your patience and all the work that you do, the thoroughness, the professionalism in which you do your jobs, and you represent this Commonwealth and the LRC very well, and you are very much appreciated. Members, thank you all for your attention and your attendance during these meetings. And next interim, you're probably going to see some significant changes in the way we operate, and we will start getting into more of the investigative side of the changes that were made to this committee. And looking forward to that, and looking forward to digging into some issues and spending a lot of time on certain issues. So thank you for all that you have done, and I want to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And again, keep those in our state that are in need right now in your prayers. Thank you all, and we stand adjourned.